So, good morning, everyone. How are you feeling? So, three of you. 1, 2, 3. How are you feeling? Anybody put their hand up and tell me?
Not good.
Not good.
I drank too much of it.
Drank too much of it.
Testing
Okay.
it.
Okay. Anyone else? You feel great over there. John, you wanted to say something?
I volunteer, but I feel tired and I just don't want to spread that around because it might bring the mood down.
Okay. Don't worry. We've got lots of things to keep you up there. So first of all, I'd like you to take 5 minutes. You should still have some post-it notes. I see some of them are still unopened. And please write down thoughts, feedback about yesterday. How you feel about how yesterday went? Any thoughts? Good, bad, ugly, beautiful, magical, anything goes. And please stick them on the flip chart there at the back. You can see it's got all hearts and stars in the hope. But please be honest. Tell us what you think. 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes. Thank you very much. You can see the volume's gone up. That means you've stopped thinking and you've started talking. Just a reminder that there is going to be, when is it going to be, in fact, open mic. Open mic is your opportunity to say something for a maximum of 3 minutes. About anything you like. You can ask a question, give a comment, ask for help, give some information about what you're doing, anything you like. So the list is over there. There's one person on it at the moment, which is Cecile. So, which I'm sure is exciting, but it would be even more exciting if there were more of you.
And she's number 3.
And she's number 3. So we're going to start the session now, enough talking. This morning, so yesterday we tried to make the session as open as possible and as interactive as possible. We want to do the same today and even more so. So this is really a forum. This is our opportunity to exchange ideas, thoughts, experiences around change systems. What is our favorite way of making change happen? What are our experiences around change? What do we think is the best change system? So we're going to start off, just to get some blood flowing and some juices going in our brains, with 3 presentations from Dorte. Now that's interesting. Steve, who I can't see here right now.
Right in front of you.
I'm sorry? Where? Oh, I'm sorry, you were over there yesterday. No, you weren't, you were over there, quite right. Well, you're very quiet this morning, that's why. Did you have a good time last night?
Great.
Ah,
I got all 3 wines,
yeah, well,
just not the north-south.
I was going to say something about that, but for me it was a very interesting experience. I got everything wrong. And then the third one will then be Lisa. So let's start, Dorte. I shall just bring up your presentation. You're mic'd up, so that's fine.
Okay, good morning. Nice to see you all again. Sorry I missed the wine tasting. I hear there was some confusion and some cheating going on. I would have loved to have been part of that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dorte. I'm from Cohort 5, and my daily practice has to do with helping leaders in the public sector make sense of what's actually going on in their professional life right now. I work primarily in Denmark and in Norway, but sometimes also a little bit in Germany. And what I found is that right now a lot of change is going on. I know you already spoke a little bit about that yesterday. We have a lot of wicked problems that are apparent to everybody. I mean, just to mention a few, I mean, the environmental changes, migration, an aging population, youth unemployment. I mean, we have a lot of issues that we as a public sector in the Western countries are not able to address and solve in the way that we used to do. So the kind of starting point of my work is that we're actually in what I would describe as a middle age. We had one paradigm, we had one way of doing this that evolved after the Second World War that led to the building up of different welfare state regimes in different parts of the West. That system worked for a number of years and produced a lot of things that I think we can be very proud of. But right now, it's not really working anymore. And I mean, this has been apparent, I think, in most Western countries for the last 10 or 15 years. The problem is that instead of realizing that we had to do something basically different, I think in most countries what we've tried to do is have been trying to patch things up, doing a little bit more of what we've been used to doing. But right now, most of us are in the situation where we've run out of money. I mean, we can't continue pouring more resources into the public sector, realizing that it's not able to do the stuff that's needed. I mean, what we can do in the public sector isolated is not enough to solve the problems that we are facing. I think that's a hard thing to realize for many of the people that have been brought up in the public sector, been working there for 10, 30, 50 years, some of them even, that we need to realize that we can't do this alone. We have to work together with the civil society, with the private sectors, with basically everybody who can contribute. So how do we help public sector leaders trying to work in new and different ways? And why would we do that? So my starting point is that the way to build the bridge that will enable us to make sustainable change in the system that we're all part of, I think we have to start working with the minds of the public sector leaders, not because they're the most important part of the equation, but because they have the potential to screw this up if we don't get them thinking in the right way about what it is we're doing right now. So that's basically my work. I train public sector leaders, trying to challenge them, trying to inspire them to think in new ways about what it is they're doing when they're leading people. And I also train them in trying to become brave enough to experiment with new leadership roles that they haven't been trained to take traditionally, roles that they find a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit, they're a little bit unaware of what's entailed in playing this role. But I try to help them to create safe environments where they can actually experiment and reflect on what it is they're doing when they're leading. So just a few words about what kind of mental model. Yeah, sorry.
Have you been successful?
Yes.
You should hire and what do you mean for
Well, what I mean for success is that this is very difficult to aggregate. So I can't say to you that I've been working with perhaps 15 local governments in Denmark, and I can't tell you how many million euros they've saved on their budgets. But what I can tell you is that I have leaders now who are acting in different ways, who are, being much more curious about who can contribute to solving the task at hand, who are being ambassadors for creating new systems of cooperation with actors that they didn't have used to cooperate with. And I think most importantly, leaders who are now committed to the whole value chain as seen from the point of view of the citizen and the corporation, and not just their kind of individual part in it. But I'll give you some more examples as I move along on what it could be. Just a little bit about what kind of mental models are we talking about? Because the kind of headline for this session is systems of change. And what I work with is trying to establish within the mindset of the leaders the idea that they are part of a system, and what they need to produce in order to be leaders is direction, alignment, and commitment. If we don't have these three, they haven't been able to assert any kind of leadership in the situation that they're responsible of. And for many of you, that may be obvious, but for most of the leaders that have been trained traditionally in the public sector, for them, leadership is about what the boss says. What comes out of his or her mouth, that's leadership. So they've been trained in this very kind of positional way of looking at leadership. Of course, they know that the person matters as well, and that we need to have some kind of management processes in the organization as well. But this kind of dramatic, really shift in mindset to say, well, it doesn't matter if we have the person, the position, and the process. If we don't have direction, alignment, and commitment, you haven't been able to produce leadership. So what I say to managers is that the good news is that this can take place without one manager being present in the room. We can produce leadership without one manager. The bad news is that we can have a lot of managers in the room that are not able to produce leadership because they can't basically agree on what is the direction we want to go into. How can we cooperate in making this happen? And are we sure that we have everybody on board? To give you an example, in Denmark, we have the situation right now with an aging population. This is putting a lot of pressure on our healthcare system. What's one of the ways we've been dealing with this, quote unquote, is to try to reduce the costs of hospitalization by actually getting people in and out of the hospital in a very effective manner. The only problem with that is if you are part of the local government, that means that you now receive people at a much earlier stage than you used to, which means that the kind of processes you need to put in place at the local government level are much more complex than they used to be. So, if we have leaders who are just looking at this from a kind of the narrow perspective, what they would say is, okay, so now we have a new task here. We just need to do this as effectively as possible. So we'll just deal with our own resources and try to make this happen. The problem is no one local government, not even the biggest one we have in Denmark, have the resources and the skills to actually handle this situation on their own. They have to cooperate with the regional governments. They have to cooperate with the voluntary organizations. They have to cooperate with the citizens and the network of the citizens in order to make this happen. And so we have in the same very small country of 5.5 million inhabitants, we have very different models emerging of how to do this. And I think it's extremely interesting to see the difference between the managers who are able to grasp this and say, okay, so now we have a system of stakeholders that actually need to agree on what direction are we moving into. And then we have part of the equation that we need to contribute to this, but other people have another part of the solution. And how can we facilitate this? Instead of just saying, okay, so now I have a new job if I'm in a local government, and I'll just have to make it work as I can best with my own people and my own resources.
Because that, I mean, my background is UK, local and central public sector, and what you're talking of is one of many of the fundamental problems that there is what is called cost shunting. So it's far too many older people end their lives in hospital, which is very expensive for them to be, but if you get them out, you put it on local government, and you shift the cost.
Yes.
So the system just does not work. So, but it's quite surprising in the UK health system is everybody knows what the problem is. Everybody just has a different solution to that problem, and nobody can agree on it. So there is a thing around different leadership models, but the system itself is broken in terms of how you actually get people in more cost-effective, more caring and compassionate environments who live their lives in a way that Western society should ensure happens. So I'm just wondering how you're balancing that sort of leadership model with some fundamental tectonic shifts that are needed in the absolute structure of the public sector.
But I think the point here is that, yes, the system is broken, but the problem is we can't design a new system because we don't have the resources and we don't have the knowledge to do that in a systematic way. So right now, new systems are emerging that are very different from, area to area. So I think basically you can define this as a systems problem, but I think part of the solution lies in the leadership mental models, because you need people to take responsibility and do something even though the system is broken. Because right now, you can look at the migration situation. Yes, the system is broken, everybody can agree on that, but we don't have a leadership coalition that's strong enough to fix the system. So while we are waiting for that, and I think we may have to wait indefinitely for that, we need to create local solutions to the problem. And that requires managers that think like this and are not just focused on their own position or the processes that they can put in place in their own kind of system. Just one more. I think this is basically what I took away from CCC, the ability to shift your mental models or your lenses of understanding organizations. A lot of the leaders that I meet in the public sector have been exclusively trained in looking at their organization from a machine metaphor perspective. And right now, what they're facing is an everyday life where they feel that they're constantly failing because they try to create machine metaphor solutions for things that can actually not be handled within that metaphor. So what I'm trying to do is to help them kind of navigate in a system where most of the official documents, most of the funding, most of the formalized structures we have in the public sector are made and built exclusively in this kind of left-hand scenario. But still they have so much work to do on the right-hand scenario. And trying to make sense of that and understanding that you are working with human beings. We do not react rationally when it comes to change. We need to make room for experiments, for emergence, and we need to make sense of what is going on as this happens. So actually balancing, but also being able to integrate these two very different ways of looking at your everyday life. I think that's a key challenge for most managers. Just before I came here yesterday, I was in one of the most Western municipalities or local governments we have in Denmark, sitting with a room full of head teachers. And we have a big reform of our school system right now. And these people were really struggling with trying to make sense of a reform initiative that was exclusively built here in this left-hand column. I mean, with very elaborate plans, strategies, action plans, indicators, monitoring systems, all that stuff going on within the school system. And at the same time, having a number of teachers who do not know what hit them. I mean, who are really struggling right now to regain kind of a sense of mastery and what does it mean to be a teacher in this new scenario? How can we even do what we are supposed to do? So that's, I mean, another kind of central mental model, which is, I mean, it's obvious for you because we've trained this together. It's not obvious to most of the leaders that I work with. So I published this book at the beginning of this year, where I tried to introduce these different mental models, but also introduce some new leadership roles. And when you look at the illustration, you think new leadership roles. They're not new. Actually, my point is they're roles that have been around for some time, but I think we need to reinvent these roles in a modern scenario, and look at what does it mean to be a public sector leader in the 21st century. Well, my claim would be that you need to be able to assume all these different roles, and whatever role is necessary has to do with your ability as a reflective practitioner, your ability to analyze what it is you're dealing with and try to put on the kind of appropriate hat for whatever situation you're in. The diplomat and the prince are perhaps some of the roles that most public sectors feel rather comfortable with, but there are some nuances here. Relationship building has always been part of being a leader in the public sector. The challenge now is that they need to build relationships that are much more cross-cutting than they used to be. I mean, they need to really build relationships with all the key persons in their kind of civil society environment, voluntary organizations, private sector organizations, and what I've been doing for a number of years now is helping public sector managers map their network contacts. And a recurrent pattern is that most of them exclusively have a network within the public sector. They have very few relationships that are committed outside of the public sector. And one way of changing this is that we need to change that picture. We need to make them aware that they need to grow relationships on a much broader scale than they've been used to. Also, partnership building, a key challenge. I mean, most of the public sector managers I'm working with are extremely skilled at putting out a tender, asking somebody to do a job, paying them for this job, saying goodbye, and put out the next tender. Partnership is something completely different. It's much more mutually dependent, it's much more long-term, it's much more committed. And we are not used to that in the public sector. And even some of the regulation we have at the European level as well actually is prohibitive of building lasting partnerships, because you need to go into these kind of tender things all the time. And mobilization of resources that were, unto this point, unknown is also a very, very big thing here. An example from, if you look at the aging thing again, in Denmark, if you look across the local governments, within the last 3 to 4 years, the internal estimations of the local governments themselves is that they've saved 1/3 of the money that they're spending on taking care of elderly people. And the way they've been doing this is that they have changed their approach from being one of taking care of people to actually helping people to be able to take care of a lot of things themselves. So instead of, if you have a person in the 80s who's maybe had hip surgery or something like that, this person comes home. Instead of having a person coming there taking care of doing the laundry, doing the cleaning, doing the food, everything, what you would do now is you put in a highly specialized team of people who will really help to make this person regain the full mobility, will train with them and will give them different kinds of help. That could also be technical help, like new types of vacuum cleaners, whatever, to make this person to be able to actually live their own life as independently as possible. And within this, this is a short period of time, it saved 1/3 of the cost of taking care of elderly. So these are resources that we didn't know that we had these resources but we actually do. And there are many other examples of areas where you need to find out a new way of thinking about what it is you're doing. Yes, Luc?
That's a question. I mean, I do not know the situation in Denmark, but if I'm thinking about, for example, in Taiwan, the public sector people, even if they just have dinner with business people, actually some of them become, they lost their jobs because later on,
Yes.
some other politicians would attack them, or and also if you say building longer term relationship, it's I don't know, at least the politics in Taiwan is that's quite sensitive. If you go too
Yeah.
close, especially if you have a private dinner or anything
Yeah.
with business people, it's very dangerous. So I think most of the politicians they cannot do that. So
No.
they make sure they only talk with the public sector people.
Well, I'm very aware that this is very culturally sensitive, and I'm speaking from the context of the least corrupt country in the world. So I'm aware of that. But what I would say is that what I recommend is that you build these relationships in the everyday practice. This is not about having cocktails or dinner. This is about doing work together in the everyday life. So like it's not like that the top level people have to connect. It's more like at the operational level that people need to know if I'm living in this civil society where I have two big corporations, I know these are the two guys I need to get in touch with. If I have some of the young people that are dropping out of school now, they need to work at this company for perhaps 6 months, then we can get them back on track, taking an education. I'll just phone this guy and ask him, can you get me a job for this young kid? Because otherwise there's a danger that he'll really drop out. So that's what I'm talking about, that kind of context. It doesn't have to do with our personal connection, but it has to do with getting work done.
But we create, for example, in our company some workshops and invited some governmental representatives and so on. And they say, hey, we cannot come to you at Deutsche Telekom. On the other hand, we have to go to the workshop for Vodafone and for the other also. So it's very difficult
Yes.
to have a really narrow partnership and to work out some new visions with them, because they say, okay, we have to be independent, we have to go to every company then.
Yeah. And then I think in that situation, you really need to change the mind shift to saying, well, if I accept your invite, I don't have to go to Vodafone and ask them to do the same kind of session, but if Vodafone asks me, I have to come as well. That's the mindset, I would argue.
Or perhaps the public sector leaders could take the lead in this.
Yes.
So they would be inviting you, instead of,
Yeah.
so that's maybe the new kind of role you could develop.
Just a little bit about, yes, sorry?
I just got a bit of a one-on-one question about these identities. What's the basis that you use to construct these identities, the diplomat, the prince? Is it observation or research or?
Well, it's actually, I mean, to be quite honest, I started writing this book about what was I witnessing right now in the public sector, and had been for the last 3 years that I've been working with a number of local governments. And a lot of themes popped up. So what I did was actually starting with these themes, starting with the case studies around these themes. And then when I looked at it, it was, a big chaos, because there were kind of like 35 some themes. And what I did was try to, together with Lars, actually try to look for a structure that could make sense of how these themes were actually connected. So that's, so it's not some kind of grand theory. It's more the other way around, built around the basic case studies that I had. Just a little bit about power. I think one of the big game changers right now is to have public sector leaders who who feel comfortable with the fact that they do have formal power, but also comfortable with the fact that they don't have to use it every time they can. That they can get a lot more work done using their personal power. Because, and then again, I know this is culturally sensitive, but in countries with quite a low power distance, the formal power tends to wear off. I mean, if you use it a lot, people get very tired of you. They don't want to follow you. They don't want to be part of what you're making happen. So what I do is actually try to train managers in saying, well, you have so many other sources of power, use them. You know a lot. You can connect people a lot. I mean, you have a personal kind of energy when you enter a room. Use all of these things instead of saying, I'm the boss and I want it done like this, because that kind of kills the discussion. And also, in my country, power tends to be a kind of a negative thing to talk about. I mean, we really don't want to go there, because I mean, we know that there are kind of hierarchies, but we're not that comfortable with it, to be quite honest. So what I'm dealing with here is also try to make these managers see power as something positive, as something that's actually something that can transform things. Because if you have a room of powerless people, I mean, nothing's going to happen. But if you have a room of people who will use their power and gather around a common purpose, then change can actually occur. And it doesn't take that much. I mean, it doesn't take that many people in a room that are committed to actually change things. I've tried to backtrack a number of the most important changes in our system. And what I basically ended up with, and that's bridge to you, Lisa, what I basically ended up with was looking at kitchen table conversations. I mean, 6 or 7 people starting to think about a problem in a new way and acting in different ways about this. The explorer, I think, is a role that most of you are very comfortable with. That's the one that we've been trained to do here at CCC. I think an important point here is to balance the paradigm of innovation as design with the paradigm of innovation as emergence. Because most of the managers that I deal with, they think innovation is a design challenge. And that means that they overlook a lot of the stuff that they already have within their system. Positive deviance, one method, but just being curious about what are people doing in your organization, and are some people doing something interesting that you're actually not aware of as a manager, but where you can actually spread the news that this is working. And all the time reflecting on what am I doing? Instead of trying to analyze and make big designs, doing a lot of experimentation in practice. Then I have the BARD, which I think is actually one of the most important roles right now, being part of a public sector that's facing a lot of change. People need to make sense of what is happening. So the problem is not the change. I mean, the change has already arrived. The problem is making sense of the change, making sense of it into our everyday practice, finding out how it's connected with what we were already doing. And also seeing resistance to change as something that's actually a very valuable thing from a leadership point of view. Because once people really resist, then you know you've hit gold. I mean, because then you have energy. There's something going on here that's interesting, and you have something to work with instead of just looking. The last two, the gardener, I think it's all about the learning culture, the learning environment. How can we fertilize what's going on in our organization, align what motivates the individual with what we want to achieve, but also making people comfortable with using a sense of humor as a leadership tool. And you may think this is a strange thing to dwell upon, but I find that the times that we have right now, there's a lot of things that, I mean, either you can say it's a tragedy or you can look at the bright side of it. I mean, because both scenarios are possible, but I think we need a sense of humor to release some of the tension that's in our systems right now, because it's not easy. I mean, a lot of what's going on right now is actually quite hard. And you do have people who really find it difficult that when you tell them, well, it's a basic fact that we're not going to get more money to the public sector. It's not going to happen. I mean, nobody's going to throw more gold into the public sector. We can't change our demographic development. It's there. We can't change the fact that we have climate change. We can't change the fact that we do have a migration problem. I mean, all these are kind of, I mean, looking from the public sector, these are just things you have to come to terms with because they're there. And other, you can either lean back and say, well, that's a pity, or you can say, okay, so what do we do now? And I think humor is actually a very powerful tool in this connection. The last one is The Alchemist, and I won't go very much into this because I know you talked about mindfulness yesterday. The point here is really just saying that we do have a lot of resources and energy that's potential, but for many leaders and also for the employees, not realized because we don't work systematically with our physical, our emotional, our mental, and our spiritual energy. And for the leaders that I work with, I find that the two areas where you can gain the most is the mental awareness that you talked about, I guess, in some detail yesterday, about how you can harness your mental energy by meditation and mindfulness, but also the spiritual energy. And that has to do with, you know, the idea that you do have a purpose. It's not just about paying down the mortgage or bringing up children. I mean, we're put here on earth because we have a purpose. We have something, we have a change we need to achieve. And if you can tap into that, I mean, if you can find out what is my purpose, then a lot of energy is released because suddenly things that didn't make sense before actually make a lot of sense. So, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I hope I haven't spent too much time, but thank you.
You've done a wonderful job. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So, early morning, I know for me, I like to stretch. So how about everyone standing up and doing a stretch up high so you feel those bones and those muscles move. You see, this is the American in me coming out. Thank you. Darty, I was very impressed that you brought up spirit. It's always a big divide in my experience. I do most of my work in Europe, but it's always a big divide in my experience between Americans and Europeans is that you can't use the word spiritual in Europe or spirit. And we had an interesting discussion about that yesterday with awareness. So thank you for making that explicit. And I loved the way you framed it around purpose.
I do not totally agree, Steve. Sorry.
You don't? Okay,
No, I
please.
don't, because you can really use the word spiritual in Europe.
Uh-huh.
So, for example, I did a coaching education where we used a lot and talked a lot about spirituality. And we also, and the same group also did a leadership and management training. There's also a lot of spirituality based on Benedictine.
Wonderful. Thank you. You're liberating me. Thanks. Well, my presentation is going to be very non-spiritual in the sense it's very scientific, right? So this is a story of a particular project I undertook. I work often in an action research format. So we have a question, we're trying to investigate it, we're trying to bring in other partners to be able to build their capacity, make sure that what we're doing is relevant to what their work is, and understanding how to then develop new ways of approaching great challenges. So this particular project was part of a larger set of initiatives, which you'll maybe laugh a little bit about the scale of it. So the background question is how to build pathways to sustainable enterprise, considering today's aren't sustainable, et cetera. So we set up 3 labs, one at the individual level, one at the organizational level, one at the societal level. So the organizational level is asking questions about how do we shift mindsets, models, leadership strategies, and neuroscience, et cetera. The organizational level is asking questions about how do we shift organizations' processes, products, procedures, decision-making structures, et cetera. And the lab at the ecosystem level is about how do we shift policies, markets, and values to be able to support the arising of sustainable enterprise. So this is a crazy big picture. Anyways, we developed this lab called the Energy Lab, a little bit of funding from the Enel Foundation, which is one of the largest foundations, or one of the largest electricity companies in the world, utilities. And this was the question we were asking, is how to greatly enhance our ability to shift our operating environment or, this ecosystem enabling environment to be able to support the emergence of sustainable enterprise. So there's 3 core concepts that emerged in this and a particular tool that you can see in one slide as I'll show you. And I hope this tool is useful, and if you're interested in applying it further, I'd be very interested in working with you because we're at a stage where it needs further development and further application. But one of the core concepts is to distinguish between the production system and the change system. And those are 2 concepts that we have muddled together a lot. And so the model that I use is this one of the DNA double helix to be able to explain the relationships between the production and the change system. So they have to be very close and intertwined. There has to be lots of exchanges between the 2. But it is useful, we believe, to make them analytically distinct to be able to realize the development of the change system. So this is the classic system dynamics map of the production system, right, for energy. You have basically in the traditional energy system, you have the energy generation, the energy transmission, energy distribution, energy consumption. And so those are the 3 stages. And then we have down here the evolving production system. Now, the electricity change system is a bit more complex, literally. You can see that that linear model represents the engineering thinking, right? That's the complicated. I love being with this group because I can say these things and know you understand what I mean. It's so rare that happens. So the electricity change system is complex. It includes all of these types of things. So we've got the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. They have an electric utilities program. They're experimenting with how to do different things with electric utilities. We have the World Energy Council. It's a multi-stakeholder network globally. We have the Climate Action Network. It's an NGO network working on this issue. We have a lot of IGOs working on this issue. So we wanted to look at this globally. Now, the question about global is counterintuitive a little bit. You might say, well, why don't you start at a country level or a city level? But if you look at it globally, the problem with starting at the country level or a local level is that you embed a lot of idiosyncrasies that are to do with the particular characteristics of that location. Rather than if you're at the global level, the belief is that we will be able to aggregate the generalities that are necessary for what we're calling a change system. So when we looked at the global level, what did we look at? So we looked at, we identified over 265 initiatives working globally. We looked at initiatives that had, therefore, a multi-continental approach, and we looked at initiatives that were networks. So that included all those ones that I just listed. The World Business Council, of course, is a network of businesses. The UN, the UNEP are networks of governments. The belief behind this choice was, one, we wanted to reduce the number of the population of the samples so that it was manageable, and number two, that one organization on its own isn't going to be able to do a whole lot at a global level. So that's how we thought of the change system. Now there's a methodology. Is anyone familiar with network or web crawl analysis? That's what we have here. So this is simply a picture of the virtual reality, relationships in virtual reality between these organizations. It's a very useful tool to be able to map and identify the population of a particular group. I won't go into the details of it, but what we have here are, so it's very useful at the global level, for example, where you have, any organization that's going to have any influence is going to have a decent website. Of course, if you go to the Congo, you can't make that assumption. But here you can see the way the methodology, the tool actually groups organizations by their closest affiliations. So we can see the neighborhoods that emerge in this particular analysis of the change system. So just like that previous system dynamics map was a map of the production system, this is a map of the change system. So we have up here those organizations which are developing market-based solutions. They're trying to influence the market. So the blue dots are ones that I colored as blue. They're the ones, some of the ones from our sample final choice. We focused upon 65 organizations, networks in particular. So you have the Carbon Disclosure Project way up here. Way up at the top corner there, that blue one is Enel, the company that was funding us. The UN Global Compact's down here. Over here you have those organizations that are particularly focused upon environmental concerns arising out of it. So the World Energy Council is here. The Stockholm Environmental Institute is there. Over here you have organizations that are particularly concerned with the issue of efficiency and energy efficiency. Down here, what I call the governors, so these are all the intergovernmental organizations. Down here you have organizations that are particularly focused upon the questions of renewable energy. Over here, organizations that are using advocacy strategies, so this is where the Climate Action Network is as a network of NGOs. And in here, interestingly, at the center, you have the institutes, the research organizations. So that gives you one way of looking at the change system. Now, it's, yep.
What's the significance of the size and the color of the bubbles?
So the size indicates that there are more linkages. The bigger it is there's more linkages from others on the map. And the color, the blue are the ones that we used, particularly focused on. We focused upon a subset of 65 organizations, and blues are some of those. And the pink ones here are Sustainable Energy for All, which is an initiative under the leadership of the Secretary General, which has arisen out of the ashes of Kyoto to be a much more multi-stakeholder, a global action network, if in my lingo. Okay.
The loose definition of a line or relationship is what?
That there's hyperlinks that connect the two sites. So there's a hyperlink from one site, with those underlined blue things that you click on and it says go to a certain site. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for interrupting my fast pace here. Any other? You're fine?
Just on those relationships, is it neutral in that 10 relationships outnumber 5, or do you rate the nature of those relationships?
We don't do anything to intervene in the way the hyperlinks are linked.
Those bubbles are therefore just a numerical aggregate.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And so you've got to consider, this is a map of virtual reality, which increasingly represents our actual reality as our websites become more sophisticated. But you've got to remember that there's quite a range in sophistication of websites and the number of hyperlinks between sites as well. So just, this is one gross representation of reality. So this is the general idea behind what we were trying to do. We were suggesting that we're actually at state A to state B. So state A Any major issue in the world today has hundreds, if not thousands, of initiatives, change initiatives, right? So we're saying it's not so much about thinking in terms of developing another change initiative, but we should shift to thinking about how to develop an effective change system. So an effective change system would be something like this. Those who were here yesterday for Global Action Networks can see sort of my thinking along this line too, where there's greater coherence, there's a sense of direction, reflecting the points that Dorothy was just making before, a sense of connectedness. So how do we move from state A to state B?
Question. I mean, if we look at this like, we know we are talking about networks, but if we look at like chemistry, if you connect two dots here, all the other bubbles will shift as well. So you are not going to have state B look like the state A just with the links.
Absolutely, yeah. There will be lots of, this is a very generalized, easy model, but it doesn't represent the intricacies of relationships and what their impact are, absolutely.
My question is then we don't know what is state B.
Yes, we do. We know one that has, there's lots of ways to measure it. It's about the relationships, the amount of flow between the relationships, about how they're working together as a system. There's lots of ways to measure that.
No, you say today we are in state A, right?
Right.
And we want to move to state B.
Right.
But we don't know what we shift in state A will become. So
Oh, it's...
There's no clear state B we can target because we don't know if we...
You see, it's not a goal that we're targeting in the sense of an objective like this is what the electricity system is going to look like. What we're targeting is let's have a more coherent change system. So the goal is coherence. It's not the actual technology or saying this is the way the system, the production system is going to be organized. Does that? It's about relationships of those who are trying to realize change in the electricity system. There's lots of social network methodologies for measuring the strength of a system and system ties. Just if you can accept that, and we can go into it later if you like. So we looked at these 65 initiatives in detail, and we said, why do we have 65 initiatives? Why wouldn't we just have a dozen? Why do we need 65? What are they actually doing? And we found that if we categorize them the way we usually categorize systems, by purpose and by the stakeholder membership, that there were these 5 different systems that sort of fell out. So there's a whole group of organizations, of course, that are focused upon changing policy at the global level. And these are naturally involved under the leadership of intergovernmental organizations, but of course there's lots of others that are trying to influence it. We have a whole group of organizations that are involved in new technology development. So that usually starts under the leadership of some academic idea from some institute and then gradually brings in other stakeholders. We have a group that's focused upon shifting the finance system so that we can shift the investment patterns from traditional technologies to new technologies. Now, a lot of that is the aspiration is that it influences the private sector financing. That's what the key stakeholder is in that group. Consumption systems, that involves retail, residential, wholesale consumption patterns and purchasers. Probably the least organized of any of the systems. And the service provider system. I originally called this utility system, but as somebody pointed out, that utilities are, as I've gotten to know more about renewable energy, utilities are just part of the emerging system. There's a lot of other parts. So this is actually the system which is under leadership of the production system itself. So we're saying that different actors, the different change initiatives are focused upon changing different parts of the system. So for this one, for example, there's a lot of internal utility system change efforts. World Business Council for Sustainable Development will be particularly focused upon that, for example. So there's different leadership in these different systems. And then we ask the question, okay, we've got these 5 subsystems of a change system, and this is the third core concept. What is it that we know about systems, change systems in particular, that they have, what is it that we know they have to do really well to be really effective? So partly based upon my work around global action networks, partly on others, there's quite a bit of work done on this. These are the things that we know have to be done well. So there has to be something done about visioning, you know, that we have to know that we're moving in a certain direction. There has to be some sense of commonality of vision emerging. There has to be some type of system organizing. Every organization on its own has to somehow be aggregated, and there has to be some sort of community of action developed. We have to have some way of measuring, certifying progress when we know where we're going, and some way of creating indicators of where we're going and whether we're getting there. Something about developing learning capacity so that we don't have a huge amount of repetitive knowledge development, and that we have much more speedy application of knowledge. Prototyping, we have to try new things, you know, new public policy, new financing methods. We have to have advocates in the system. You know, without advocates for change, those people who are holding the feet to the fire of everyone else to make sure we're moving in a change system, we're just going to have a bureaucracy that's going to be sort of managing the current state rather than moving us to a new state. And we have to have some way of mobilizing resources to finance all of this activity. So those are what we call the functions academically. I'm sure you're comfortable with that. So then we went and looked at these 65 initiatives, and we analyzed them in terms of these 7 functions, which are down on the left-hand side. And you can see this is for the policy subsystem of the World Bank. So I sat down with the people at the World Bank, and we went over this model. I said, oh, great, well, we're doing everything. You know, we're doing all of these functions and all of these subsystems. And I said, well, probably not. And if you are, you probably want to rethink that, because your core competency isn't going to be in every of those subsystems for all of those functions. And it might help you get a better idea of where you really are focused. So this is what we have here. We mapped the individual programmatic initiatives of the World Bank. For instance, they have here studies for individual countries and for multi-countries. They have a whole program about doing those types of studies. And we identified which ones were most important from the staff's point of view. So the green ones here indicate what the staff thinks are their core programs, and the other ones are ones that they're doing but are not core. So, you know, seeing this strategically, then it helps them ask questions about, well, should we be doing more in this one, or is it something we're just not very good at and we should get somebody else to do it and just drop it and focus upon our core questions? So this is the World Bank again for the consumption subsystem. We can see that they're only really doing one thing in the consumption subsystem. So they started with this reaction that, oh, we're doing all of them and we're doing all the functions and all the systems, and they sort of realized that actually they're not. So what does that do? That gives us this, oh, it's interesting. I didn't get the cells here. That gives us this final product, which is what summarizes all of this work, which is the systemic change matrix. So this maps, this you can use to, it's a mapping process, right? It helps make the change system visible to itself. We all know how important it is for the system to see itself. And what we did was bring together some people from major change initiatives like IRENA, the intergovernmental organization globally on renewable energy, from the Carbon Disclosure Project, from the Global Cities Initiative around renewable energy. We had a utility there, et cetera. And we said, we went through all of this, and number one, I was relieved because they could understand it quite easily, right? One of my big questions when you're embedded in this with a team of researchers is, are we doing something that's so esoteric that we'll never be able to explain it to anybody? But they got it quite easily. And we said, can you write down the names of your programs on Post-it notes? And there are actually cells here. As you can imagine, each of these is a cell. And can you take the name of that program and post it in a particular cell? So they did that quite easily. And so, of course, some programs fit into more than one cell, so that happens as well. And then you can stand back and you can take a look at this is the global change system for energy. Of course, it's very incomplete still, and you might want to have more investigation. But you can start to get a sense of where are the gaps, where are we having perhaps unuseful redundancies, where is somebody else working that I might have been unaware of. For instance, in one of these, we found that there were 2 that were working on the advocating consumption globally, and they had not connected their campaigns, and now they could connect them. And so they start to understand their relationship, and it shifts a sense of accountability away from simply being your change initiative to accountability to having a healthy change system. So it's a big mindset shift, right? People can now understand it's not just about what I'm doing in my particular initiative. It's about how does my initiative fit within the needs of the change system. So there's lots of conflicts that can arise out of this, etc., because people can see that they might be in competitive positions. So there's lots of need for facilitation and dialogue, etc. But it's quite a flexible model as well. We did this globally. We say you can do this nationally, where the main rubber hits the road for energy. And you could do it on a city level. So it's, in terms of geographies, it's quite flexible. And you can focus upon particular subsystems. You could have a bunch of people focusing upon the policy subsystem and say, let's just do an analysis of this and figure out how we're working, where the strengths and weaknesses are, and what we can do about it. Or you could pick a particular, how's the financing? Is the financing a major barrier throughout this change system? Where's the money coming from? Or you could focus on a particular cell, policy and financing. Who's doing that? Well, the World Bank's doing a lot of it at the global level. So it helps us understand the dynamics in a change system and develop that coherence of a change system. So this is what we are still working on trying to do, is further develop this. We've got it to this stage of development. We had a couple of projects that we were supposed to be doing for a variety of reasons of the foundation and its internal processes. It decided not to fund this next stage as it had originally committed to. But we still want to move ahead with this. And our belief is it can be applied to most production systems, like food and agriculture is another one that we're working with somebody to be able to advance development of. Maybe the policy, maybe the subsystems will change a little bit in definition, but that we can adapt it to other systems and other issues. So this is what we think we're doing with one global agriculture, food and agriculture initiative, is that we're actually doing an initial analysis of the food system from that using this map, and then we're having a 2-day meeting of some people from the system, and we're trying to, at this particular meeting, we're trying to explore how to use multiple change methodologies and integrate them into the planning and process of the actual development of the change system. So in this case, we're suggesting they would have 12 people from the food and agriculture arena, their stakeholders, and we'd have 6 people who have diverse change expertise. So somebody like Dave Snowden, who we're working with, who has a lot of expertise around SenseMaker, somebody who's very good at big data aggregation, somebody who's very good at whole system facilitation, somebody who's very good at mapping. Because we find that people are only using they're very episodic and very narrow in their knowledge of different change methodologies. I mean, you're a very unusual group because you've got a much broader exposure to them, but I'm sure you've reached this problem. So we're trying to actually do 2 things at once. Develop the systemic change matrix as a tool that's useful for mapping for people, and to be able to build capacity around large system change. So thank you.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa Francis Jennings. I'm from cohort 3, and it actually doesn't matter, you know, what kind of client I'm working with. I tend to see patterns. And I am not sure if it's because I did too many jigsaw puzzles when I was a kid, or spent too much time with my grandmother making quilts, but we're okay? but I do see patterns in everything. So what I want to talk to you about is programmatic change, and to do this, I want to tell you a little bit about the research I did, because people tend to say, oh, come on, Lisa. So I looked at about 200 models, and of those 200 models, some of them were so similar there wasn't any point in analyzing them. There were about 70 that made sense. I looked at different types of change, and of the 70 that I reviewed, I did a detailed comparison of about 11. I also took a look at some case studies, and one that was a case study by Raphael, because he always says there's no programmatic change. Everything is very complex. So I had to do that. As well, I was reading Popper's book on Black Swan. How many people have read the book on the Black Swan? So this is very important, because it was kind of pivotal for me. Popper says that if you can't prove a theory, then basically if you can find an exception, that will prove what you're looking at. So for example, you may not be able to prove that every swan is white. I did it wrong, sorry. If you want to prove that every swan isn't white, all you have to do is find one black swan. You don't have to find all the black swans. Who else has read the book? Is that close enough? Okay. So, that's what I did. And at the same time, I was training project managers to incorporate organizational change management into their practice. So it gave me a really interesting perspective on how you design systems that are very structured. So this is, and what I found with the project managers is some of the project managers I was training were very linear in their thought process. So they'd say, okay, we're going to do the definition, then we'll do the planning, then we'll execute, and then we're done, basically. And so what I said to them is, well, it's just not that easy, because what you have to do is you have to figure out what the client wants, then you have to do your planning, then you start to execute, and you will find out that you missed something. So then you have to go back to the definition, and then you might skip ahead, but it's not as linear as it looks. And that's an important concept, because people look at programmatic change and they say, change doesn't travel in a line. And I'm not saying that change travels in a line. What I'm saying is you can see a pattern, and there are sequences. You may have to go back and repeat from time to time, but there are clear sequences. Okay, so I started with some assumptions. I have to admit, my background is content neutral facilitation. And what that means is we have a process. So a client will come to us and they'll say, we've got this problem. And we'll say, no problem, we've got a process. We'll take your content, we'll put it into our process, and we'll come out the other side with a solution. So it's very easy for me to see the patterns. And looking at when Jerry did his stuff on positive deviance, or Richard was talking about, the chaos theory, what struck me is they say there is so much complexity you can't plan, but I saw the pattern. And so these are some of the assumptions I worked with. And I'm not saying that every change program uses the same model. But what I'm saying is there are 4 or 5 models, and you can probably fit just about any change program into the world using those models. I believe very strongly that now, unlike 15 years ago when we go into an organization and we'd have to explain what we were doing because no one had heard of organizational change. I believe now there's an appetite for change, and I also think that people understand it in a fundamental way. And just like the kitchen table tomorrow, we'll talk a little bit about how natural it is because we have a social construct around the kitchen table. There is a progression in change that even when you look at case studies of experiments of just, I looked at one that was a merger, and they said we legally merged these two companies and didn't do anything else and watched what happened. You see a pattern of change emerging because people just have a natural propensity for following a systematic approach. You can't really engage until you know what the problem is. You have to know what the problem is before you get a solution. It's kind of the way we live our lives if you think about it as well. So by doing the programmatic change, for me, one of the benefits is when I go into an organization, and the other difference is 15 years ago, how many people in the room were practicing organizational change 15, 20 years ago? Did you ever hear this phrase? We just need to get through this one, then we'll be okay. We just need to finish it, right? So now we have organizations, they know that if it's not another technology change, they're going to have a changing market, they're going to have a changing customer base, there's going to be a change in the people that work for them. There are always changes, and organizations have come to understand and expect that. So what I use the programmatic change model for is to give them a roadmap so that they feel comfortable and less stressed because they can say, oh, hey, we've got a plan. I know this looks really complex, but it's not. We've got a plan. Here's our menu. We have to understand if we're going to do a change, what is the urgency? What is the value? What is the benefit it's going to bring? And by doing that, they can actually plan for the transition, which means they're not just managing the change, they're managing the road in the very distant future. They're managing the landscape, and it allows them to say, okay, you know what? We're just going to go there. We're just going to go there, and then we're going to stop, and we're going to take a breath. We're going to step back, and we're going to make sure that we're headed in the right direction. And by the way, if that works, we're going to wait 4 years, because in our business, and I think we heard this at a conference a couple of years ago, in our business, this change, which is, let's say, technology, we have an ROI, we have to have it in place for 4 years before there's a return on our investment. And so the whole organization knows we're going to go to this spot, and we're going to stay there, and we're going to get comfortable. But while we're getting comfortable, we're going to plan for the next change. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so the next couple of slides, what I did is when I was training project managers, it was on large-scale technology implementation. So you're implementing any kind of ERP system, reporting systems, and so I matched the org change to the project management. Then they went to Agile. How many people are involved in Agile anything now? Because everybody, it's like Agile everywhere. So I mapped the programmatic change model to Agile, and it works. Then I took Tora's article in the book because it was an emergent approach to change. And I mapped her case study, and it maps. I dare anyone to give me a case study on project management, and I will map it. I'm not saying, again, that this is a be-all and end-all, but what I'm saying is by giving people a model that they can understand and clearly know what the next steps are. Oh, we're going to use number 1 here and number 4, and oh, when we get here, we just need the third one. you know? And what we have attached to this is, actually, I loved your matrices, Steve, because what we have attached to every one of these items is a fact sheet, 1 page, and they're always 1 page, it explains it. A matrix, a checklist, anything that will help somebody who has to use it and implement it feel comfortable and prepared. And it doesn't mean that somebody who has never been involved in change will be as good as someone who's been involved in change for 20 years, but what it means is they can try. And they've got kind of like a soft landing spot so that they don't have to fall really hard if something goes wrong.
What are the colors for?
This was, these were the things that came out of Tora's case study, and that's how they mapped. So this is what, and I can leave this up if you want, but they chose to take the role of co-learners. That was their strategy. You know, even if they say, oh, I didn't use a change program, clearly if you analyze it, you can see, you know, the language might not be the same, but the intent and the result is the same. No hidden agenda. That's a strategy and it's a theme, right? If you say, okay, we're going to be completely transparent, that is a strategy. And it's not always the same strategy, right? Not all organizations say, oh, we're going to be completely transparent in this change. Mason?
So if we go back to what I remember of our CCC roots, so there were 2 types of change. There was programmatic, which was have a problem solving, we need expertise, we need methodology to find a solution. Then there's emergent, which is conversations, looking for meaning, touchy-feely stuff. We're not even sure if we need change, but we're not comfortable. Let's work this out, which to some extent is kitchen table. It seems to me what you've done is you've taken your methodology and you've taken pattern discernment and sort of decided that pattern discernment, which you put into a model, will cover sort of everything. I'm just wondering if what I'm saying makes sense, or in other words, you seem to have stretched the initial definition, which is a little more rigid, of programmatic change, to fit your vision of everything has a pattern. Give it to me and I'll be able to show you, I'll be able to connect the dots.
And again, this won't cover everything, but I'm saying that there are patterns for about 80%, 80 to 90%. Lars, you want to?
No, I'm just thinking maybe it's not about what we call it, programmatic or emergent or whatever, but I think that's, and you talked about that, Steve, as well, and you did, Dora, as well. It's about integrating different mental models of change. And I find very often that decision makers, executives, policy makers, they are, in their DNA, they have linearity. And they want, you know, here we have the problem, we analyze, blah, 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 and then we get a result and an impact. So we need to speak in that dialect, in that language also, so it's not touchy-feely, blah, 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 all the things. So I think it's about integrating, maybe.
Well, and if I can build on that, let's take Kitchen Table for an example. So an organization contacts us to do a kitchen table. They have a reason, you know. A company will call us and say, we've got a problem, and we'll say, hey, that sounds like a really good problem for a kitchen table. Or they'll call us and they'll say, hey, we've heard about the kitchen tables and we're struggling with this problem. Can you help us by using a kitchen table? And we say, yeah, no problem. And that is a tool in the analysis phase. So, but we won't use a kitchen table for every problem, whether it's change related or not. It's like, you know, a hammer is only good for hammering things. You can't saw or screw things with a hammer, right? And what we're trying to do is we have a number of different tools, if you will, kitchen table conversation, content neutral, serious games that fit in. So it gives It gives the client a chance to feel like they can customize. It's almost like a menu. If you go to a restaurant, you know you have a starter, you have a main course, and you have a dessert. You might not want a starter. You might just want a main course. You may want to have a starter and a dessert, and sometimes that's appropriate. But if you have the menu, almost anywhere you go in the Western world, the menu follows the same pattern. And yes, to answer your question, I do recognize patterns, and I think programmatic change, by giving it a pattern that is understandable but flexible, it relaxes leadership in organizations. It gives them something they can look at and say, oh, okay, yeah, I need number 3, and show me the tools for that. What are my choices? So, and again, I'm not saying this is right in every situation, in every organization, in every community, but for the organizations going through something that fits into this pattern, which is more than we recognize now, I believe very strongly, it gives them a feeling of comfort because they know we're going to use this methodology. We're going to use this program of change each time we go through change. It assures the target audiences because they know they're going to be engaged. It's on the plan. There's a checklist. How do we engage our audiences? How do we find out? Lars.
Can I give an example? I'm working with one local authority in Denmark right now. They have chosen 3 wicked welfare challenges they're going to work on. One of them is vulnerable families, another one is communicating with the citizens, and another one is about migration and refugees. And we have this leadership group that we work with, and we are in an initial phase. And all of them, for the first meeting, came up with a budget plan. We're going to do like that. And then we were trying to motivate them to stay in the question. And then we said, well, we are in an analyzing phase. And I didn't know this framework, but we were just talking about right now we are gathering data, both quantitative data, we will be interviewing citizens, and then we will find out which problems we will actually work on. And that helped a little bit. I don't know if that makes sense.
Steve.
I think the caution with using this is suggesting that there are not significant different dynamics in different types of change. Like yesterday, I had that model of 3 different types of change, incremental, reform, and transformational. And the dynamics in those are significantly different. And the tools and the methodologies you want to use in those are significantly different. And although, you can at a very high level of analysis say that we go through this type of common set of activities, I think there would be a danger of people who have done the reform and gone through this, then approach transformation as though it's going to be the same thing, expecting the same dynamics. So it might inappropriately lessen the tension in the room. And it's like when somebody comes into a multi-stakeholder organization and they say, I'm coming from a business and this is the way we organize our business, and they assume that that's the way that multi-stakeholder organizations should be organized. That can actually be unhelpful. So you've got to be very cautious about the way you use this.
I think that is actually a great point of discussion for the forum.
Yeah, exactly.
So can you hold that thought, and I'd love you to repeat it just after the break, because I think that we could talk about that for the next hour. But yeah, and I won't respond right now because I think that would be a great starting point for the forum, if everybody's okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Liz.
We're good? All right.